Well, here we are once again with a group of agents here locally, and it's been a long time since we, did one of these agent panels, but I'm so glad to have Denise and Roy join me today. So Denise, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you are?
I'm Denise McDonnell. I'm with Red Door Realty, mostly work in HRM, a little bit of the South Shore. It's my 11th year. I'm 11 years this month in the business.
Really? Well, congratulations.
Yep.
Well, I think you were in longer than me.
No,
Oh,
I
well,
just look a lot. I just aged quicker than you for some reason.
don't be silly. And Roy, how about yourself?
I'm Roy Thomas with Sutton Group Professional Realty. I specialize in helping seniors with their downsizing moves and been in the business since 1990.
Oh, wow. That's a long time. Soon be time for
Yep.
me to help you to retire. And
Yeah,
downsize.
that's not happening.
So I wanted to, touch on a topic that's been, I guess, really big for us in our industry of what's been happening in the States and, real estate companies being sued, just really not seeing the value of buyer agents. And, Roy, why do you think, I know you've been in a long time, does the consumer, when they're in the buying process, do they really need to have representation when you can go hire a home inspector and, you have your lawyer? Why do you need an agent?
You need an agent for a lot of things. On almost all cases, you should have one. First off, an agent's going to negotiate on your behalf to get the best possible deal that you can get. An agent's going to be able to tell you how to structure the offer. An agent's going to help you be able to look for the correct type of property that's going to suit your needs. I mean, we can go in a house and look at the house with a seller or with the buyer, I'm sorry, and potentially point out some things they may want to consider, some potential problems if there's something that might be in the house that they can have someone take a further look at should they decide to proceed with the house. We can help tell them what the potential value of that property will be. Because, I mean, sometimes, as we saw in the last few years, buyers be prepared to pay an extreme amount to get a house, and sometimes some of them actually did overpay for the property. And now they're stuck with the property they can't get out of because the market will no longer support the price they paid. So if buyers agents have a tremendous value that they bring to the table to help buyers.
And how about yourself, Denise? Does the consumer really need to have a buyer agent, you think?
I think they do, but I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost is that nobody's forcing them to. There's no, there's more than one way to buy a house. And that's where sometimes I feel the criticism is unwarranted because nobody's forced to use their service. I think when I read about that decision, and I read a lot about it in the States, one of the things it centered, it seemed to turn on that the buyer's agent's great utility was in finding the house. And I think that's only one thing. And I think in Nova Scotia, I don't know if I've had a buyer in the last 5 years that hasn't been accessing, some of the very good websites that present all the listings and the listing history. So I'm used to dealing with educated buyers. That's only part of it. As Roy said, it's negotiating. It's transaction management. And I think that's the great unsung hero of what we do because it's hard to explain to people how that works until they're in it. How do you manage a transaction, both from the buying end and the selling end? A problem comes up in inspection. How do you handle it? Do you just pat them on the hand and say it'll be okay? Or do you open your book of people that you've built over the years you've been in the business and call, for a furnace inspection or call your foundation guy or call your electrician to come in and delve deeper? And I think managing the transaction, especially when you're asking for a renegotiation of price or to get the seller to do stuff or to advise that it's not wise to do that. I think that's really one of the things that's difficult to explain to people until they're actually walking through a transaction with you. And I've had that happen. I've tried to explain it to people and then they get into it and they're like, oh, I see now.
And, the other thing that I found when I am in that role, because I'm not attached to a house and, I'm not as excited as a potential buyer, I'm not afraid to say to the buying client, okay, look, you're buying this as a corner lot. When you go to sell, it's going to be harder. You're buying a flag lot. That is not, a lot of people don't like long driveways. So it's great that we can be subjective and, to overcome the emotion of buying a house because anything that you purchase, you're going to sell. regardless if you think it's your dream home or not, divorce, death, and diapers, the 3 Ds that they talk about, those things do happen. And I believe that a buyer agent is valuable, as well as, the aspects that you spoke of. Roy, can you remember like a specific instance where you were working with a client and, within the buyer role, and that they did need to have, you there?
Pretty much all of them will need you at some point in time. Even the most sophisticated buyers are still going to need to have questions answered, need some direction, need some advice from counsel. So yeah, I think pretty much every buyer, I mean, occasionally you do have a very sophisticated buyer who will just go directly to the listing agent. Maybe it's a house on their street, they're familiar with the area or something like that. But nonetheless, everyone really should have a buyer's agent, because they're going to work in your best interest and help you get the best possible deal, terms and conditions.
So when I read over the court case and, I look at other ones that are happening, I think there's another one now in Texas that just sprung up. There is one that's in Toronto, by the way. It looks like it could be a communication issue, maybe between the buyer and the client. What do you think, Denise?
Yeah, I think when I was reading it, it seemed to turn on the buyer's cooperating commission and disclosure, that the buyer didn't know how much their agent was getting paid. And as you know, we have to disclose that here to our clients. And Nova Scotia really has been a leader, I think, in the country. And from what I'm reading about the States, Canada is farther ahead than them about openness with data. We've had open data in Nova Scotia for a really long time. Our association facilitates different brokerages presenting the data to their clients in the way they wish through their websites. There are some sites that aren't related to real estate at all, where people can look at sales histories. And then we have to disclose certain things to our buyers. So I feel that our context here is fundamentally different than, I think it was Missouri in the States. And I don't think that they have to disclose. Toronto Real Estate Board, I don't think they have to disclose. And I think there are other boards and regions in Canada that don't. I feel like we're a little bit ahead of our buyers being able to freely get that information. So they know how much we're getting paid. There's no set commission.
Right? Like, so the buyer designated brokerage agreement, or it's, this is how we're paid. It's right there. If the seller refuses to pay, you potentially could be on the hook.
Yeah, and then you have for a specific property, you have to say this is what they're offering to pay, and then you have to decide if it's, there's nothing set. People, agents, and companies are free to set what they'll work for. The industry is not.
No, and to just add to that, so let's say if you did up the buyer agreement between yourself and the client, you put in what you're typically paid, which is 2.5% plus HST. In the event the cooperating brokerage isn't paying that, and let's say it's 2% or 1.75, whatever, you now have to go back in and change that, or amend that, and get the client's initials on it. So, there is full disclosure here, right?
Yeah. And that, you said 2.5 plus HST, it can be whatever you want. It can be 1, it can be 1.5, it can be 2, it can be 3, like that. And I guess that goes back to my first point, saying, people don't have to use their services. They don't. They can, in an educated way, decide whether there's value. And I would say I have yet to work with a buying client that wouldn't say there was value in what we did. And in one instance in particular, where people often go right through the seller's new construction. And I recently did a new construction contract, and they really would have been not experienced enough to navigate a lot of that. Mm-hmm. It's closed. I'm still assisting them in certain things. Because as you know, with new construction, there are warranties, there are deficiency lists. So I think that's an area where our services, especially if you've done them before, you know what to look at, because those contracts are bespoke. They're not standard forms. You have to know how to read them, and you have to know what to look for.
So, Roy, they tout it as like NAR being, conspiracy against sellers and whatnot. But so let's say if there wasn't any value in a buyer agent, let's say that did come to pass here in Nova Scotia. So let's say the house, before a law would have been passed, would have sold for $500,000. So should the house, if it lists again, sorry, not that house, if the neighbor's house list, should that house be less money to the street, like a lower price point, because there isn't commissions built in? I say it, if I see a for sale by owner, and if I see they're selling the same price as the neighbor did who sold on MLS, I'm like, oh, that property is overpriced because they're not paying any agents. So that's what I automatically think.
You know, a home is worth what someone will pay you for it. But
Yep.
if you're not on the MLS, if you're listing it privately, for example, you're going to get less traffic. You're going to be exposed to less buyers. And of course, those buyers who are willing to put an offer in a private sale are going to feel that since you're not paying an agent, that they should get the house for less money. So the seller and the buyer are trying to save the same amount of money.
Yep.
And of course, that's not going to happen. So it comes back down to the house is worth what someone will pay you for it. But when you're reducing your exposure to the property, you're probably going to take less for it.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. So what could we, so by the way, I believe that this lawsuit, and I would have stated it before our little agent discussion here, that I believe that the lawsuit was a good thing. And the reason that is because I believe that during COVID, there was a lot of agents who came into the industry, just thought it was easy. And, and several of us got lazy. And this now, I think, is a phenomenal wake-up call for not just a buyer agent to up their game, but I think all agents to up their game, because if we are going to be providing service, the consumer needs to see the value. And this is a time now where we can show value. I mean, that's just my opinion. It's not about a Facebook post with 100 things that I do as an agent. I don't think that's how I'm showing value. But, it's to give advice when, it's not just advice about inspection, but, it's advice about when you're selling, because any property that you help someone purchase, you got to be able to stand behind it for when they go to sell it. And if you don't think you can, why are you helping someone buy that house then? I mean, I don't get that either. So Roy, what do you think we can do as an industry here locally to show more value?
Well, good question. In the last couple of years where the market was so crazy, any agent, pretty much Sean, just take a listing, it was going to sell, you'll look good. Now the market's going to tighten up. We're going back to more of a normal market. And we really have to show what we can do to help people get the highest possible price. Because now when you list a property, you might get multiple offers, but generally speaking, you're not. You may only get one offer. So we need to be able to get the highest possible price. And the same thing is when we're working with a buyer, we need to show the buyer that we can help them find the best property, get the best price in terms that the market will bear on that. So we really have to step up and show people what we can do. And we bring a lot of value to the table. That's why the vast majority of real estate transactions do have two agents involved, because people realize that, but we need to keep telling them and showing them the value that we add.
And how about yourself, Denise? What do you think we can do as an industry just to show the consumer, more the value of what we bring to the table?
I think we need to focus on the important things. So informing your consumer, and that means you as an agent have to be up to date on news, development, what's happening in the neighborhood, market trends, interest rates. I think understanding that we do this every day, but that your buyer, this is the biggest thing happening in their life, and it's only going to happen once in a while, and that it's a very stressful thing. So what can we do to reduce that stress? And some of the things are really simple. So closing day, do you want your buyer to get in a fight because the house isn't clean or clean enough? With a holdback and there's back and forth and it kind of mars that day? Or do you just say, listen, my cleaner's going to come in this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow morning. And then you call the other agent and you're nice and make them feel a little bit guilty. And then you see an e-transfer show up for half. But that sounds simple. But if you center the client and how they're experiencing the transaction, you can't take all the stress out of it. But there are some things that you can be prepared to do that well. The same thing with an inspection report, because I prepare them. I always say, look, the verbal is going to be very different than when you get the book in front of you. And it's going to have everything. Let's talk about it and read the inspection yourself. Talk to your client about it. And if there are bigger things, like you can talk them through the little things. They're buying a house. There's going to be some stuff, but get an expert in there to reassure them that this foundation crack is not a concern, or it is a big concern. Those are, I think, information, sales technique is fine, but I think information is better, because the more information a person has, reasonable information, the more confident they'll be in their choice.
Absolutely. It's not just about opening a door and writing up a contract. It's everything else, the negotiation, providing that stress-free on closing day or throughout the transaction, because sometimes it can get really hairy. And, I had several times where, we just had one a couple of weeks ago. The seller didn't clean the house. And so what do we do? Myself and the agent, we chip in the, $500, and the house was clean. The buyer was happy, because at the end of the day, it's not about you or I, it's about the consumer and how they feel when the house closes.
And fights on closing day, that should be a really happy day. And if it's something like that, you can fix that pretty easily.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me today. I won't take up much of your time, and we'll certainly catch you again here on Real Talk. Thank you so much.